Hello there, and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. Today I'll be going over how I made the silver Swiss waist that I wore with the first ensemble in Sanctus. Now this is truly just a Swiss waist, which is more like a belt than an actual corset. Although it is boned, it is not meant to shape the body. The corset is actually still worn underneath, and the Swiss waist on top of everything else. So it is still outerwear, not innerwear, and I'll get into some of the differences between a Swiss waist and an underbust in just a minute. And I did actually make this in only a handful of hours because I decided to add it in at the last minute before filming. I'd actually filmed this look already once and wasn't as super thrilled with the results, and I knew it needed just a little something extra, which was to have the corset on underneath it and then accentuate that with this Swiss waist belt. But I'll get into all the details over on the blue patterning table of doom, as always. Now, like I said, this is not a true corset, although here I am beginning with my 1880s corset pattern. This is a scaled up and enlarged version of an actual 1880s corset pattern that I've used before in the past, and you can hear me talk about this pattern a little bit more in this video that I'll put up in a card here. And so to begin today, I have traced a new copy of that pattern to go ahead and modify into this Swiss waist. And I am going back in here and making sure I've also marked the waistline on this because that is something I will need to keep in mind. Now here on the left-hand side is an underbust corset from around 1900. This one's from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And we can see some things that are very indicative of this being an inner garment, a structural garment. This obviously is quite heavily boned and those boning channels are visible. We also have a center front metal busk on this garment, and there are metal eyelets down the back of this with boning either side of them, and you can see there's a higher concentration of eyelets right at the waistline where this was doing the highest level of cinching. And this would be worn underneath the outer layers of clothing over only a chemise, one of the things that was closest to the body because it was there to shape the body into the fashionable silhouette of the time. Now on the right hand side we have a Swiss waist. This one is actually from earlier in time. This is from the 1860s. Swiss waist belts like this were popular from the 1860s through the turn of the century, and these were a decorative accent worn on the outside of the garments as opposed to a structural piece worn underneath everything else. So while a Swiss waist was usually lightly boned to help keep its structure, it was to structure the Swiss waist itself, not the person wearing it. So the corset structures the person, and that corset also provides structure for anything worn on top of it, including the Swiss waist. Other noticeable differences is that Swiss waists usually have handwork, eyelets, and they sometimes didn't have lacing at all in the center front and would have a smooth front, which is actually what I'll be using on my slight recreation today. Although I will be using metal grommets in the back of mine, that is for time reasons, not necessarily for accuracy reasons, but of course I'm mixing inspiration from several different centuries into this little belt I'll be making today. It is not an accurate Swiss waist for the Victorian era or any other time period really, especially because it's going to be made out of polyester brocade. No one is surprised. Now this plate I found floating over on Pinterest seems to be showing how to make a Swiss waist sort of garment using your bodice pattern. So obviously this is something that was done at the time. I'm using my corset pattern as a base for this today because I'll be wearing it over this exact same corset. I know that the silhouette will be the same. The same would be true of a bodice that was fitted over a corset. So either way, you could create something like this from a corset or bodice pattern quite easily. But now that I have my tracing with my waistline marked, I'm going to draw some indications for myself so I can see 3 inches out, like 1 inch, and then 2 inches out from that around the waistline to keep this quite narrow and of course very focused right along the waist here. So I'm just going to draw some indications in here, still using my brown marker. Honestly, I should have switched to a lighter color so that these would remain indications and not get me tripped up in just a minute here, which you'll see. But I'm just going to start drawing in the shape I want right onto this pattern. Again, this is a tracing, so I can go ahead and cut this apart as need be for this new garment today without damaging my original 1880s corset pattern, which of course I would like to keep. But I'm just going to start drawing on the actual silhouette that I want, the shape that I want for my Swiss waist belt here today. As I sketch that onto each piece, layer the pieces closed along where the stitching line will be, and see where the new style line interacts with the next piece, and just keep doing that as I go along here, making sure I'm lining these things up properly along these seams, along the waistline, making sure that I've matched that, which of course is why this would be easier if I had done that in separate colors, because I will get a little bit tripped up, but all will be fixed before anything gets cut apart, so no problem there. And really you could draw in any shape you want while doing something like this. Of course, I'm keeping things rather traditional today for this silver brocade version. And yes, again, I did make this in probably less than 8 hours. I don't even know, maybe less than 6 hours. I did this pattern drafting the night before, then I filmed stuff for Sanctus on set for most of the next day, and then I had like maybe 4 hours to actually make the garment itself and put everything together because I wanted to shoot everything again I was making this and putting this together right in the middle of while I was filming Sanctus, which I did film on set 4 different days, 3 days of final actual stuff that got included in the video, and 1 first day of stuff that I had to throw out because I was unhappy with the resulting lighting scheme. So the first day of Sanctus filming, I actually didn't use any of it, which was a real bummer for me, but alas, it's all in the past now. But once I'm happy with the new shape I have drawn onto this pattern here, I will cut off all of the excess, cut away this corset pattern, and it is now a tiny little underbust pattern. Now if I went ahead and fully boned this, used steel boning, put a busk in the front, did full lacing down the back, I could make this into a underbust corset. It would be quite a narrow underbust corset. I would probably want a little bit more room than this if I was actually going to be doing any waist shaping with a garment like this, but this is a pattern because it is drafted directly from my corset pattern that would work for something like that, but I'm going to just be lightly boning this with plastic boning today because I'm only ever intending to wear this on top of, over my actual corset. So the corset will do the shaping and the belt will do the decorating. I'm going to cut this out of some lining fabric, in this case some black cotton muslin I had sitting around, and out of my fashion fabric, which today is this silvery sort of stone print or like cracked leather almost looking metallic silver brocade from Joann's. I found this while I was looking for something else and fell in love with it and thought it fit Sanctus just so well, and I'm glad I picked some up because it worked great for this garment. But because this brocade did want to fray like mad, I went ahead and interfaced all the silver pieces with some fusible interfacing as well, because as soon as you breathed in the general vicinity of this fabric, it was very fray-happy fabric, so I had to secure that somehow and went with fusible interfacing because it helped give me structure as well. And of course, because it is me, and I simply cannot help myself now that I have this craft cutter down here in the sewing room, I went ahead and cut out some gunmetal HTV. This is the soft metallic vinyl, I can link this below, and I cut out this filigree design to add to the front of my garment here. I also made some little rib-like sections to go along the sides and back of this piece, and these shapes were more inspired by the sort of ironwork or steel stay pieces that I had seen from centuries past. These are from more like the 15th and 16th centuries, and again are thought to be less fashion pieces and perhaps more like corrective garments. But they're definitely very hardcore and cool looking, so I was inspired by these to add even more metallic goodness to this already shining silver brocade. But I'll just use my iron to get this heat transfer vinyl to stick down onto my brocade. And I didn't actually custom fit these rib sections, so I had to cut them down to size. Because again, I was doing this within a couple of hours. I didn't have time to perfectly make graphics that would fit. The best way to do this would be to actually scan, especially because these are small pieces, scan the pattern pieces, load them into Photoshop, design what you wanted, and then print them out so they would be perfectly scaled to size. But I just made ribs that I thought would be close to the right size and then cut them down to fit these side pieces because we were working on a short time scale for this one. But once I have all my heat transfer designs onto my fabric, I can go ahead and start sewing all the side seams for this. It's just a bunch of side seams, that's all corsetry really tends to be. It's a lot of style lines. It's like sewing princess seams, but you have usually more of them. So that's what's creating the shape around the curves of the body. And the thing about like a princess seam when you're working on a bodice pattern is that it's made to like skim over the body, whereas and it's made to follow the contours of the body as it is. Whereas for corsetry, these curves can be more extreme, and then the body is expected to be shaped by those lines. So instead of the lines being shaped by what the body's shape is, the lines dictate what shape the body will become. So again, yes, a corset is meant to shape the body or reshape the body into the fashionable silhouette desired, whereas something like a Swiss waist or normal clothing is meant to just skim over the actual body itself. And like most clothing, especially modern clothing, is not meant to be nearly as structural as the undergarments of the past were. But I have all my pieces actually pinned to their pattern pieces so I don't get turned around. A lot of these pieces are very similar on the left and right hand side, so to make sure I'm sewing, everything in the right order, I have everything pinned to its pattern piece so I don't get lost and confused here, sewing left to right and right to left and up and down. Got to make sure all the pieces are facing the right direction, so either draw in chalk or in disappearing ink on the back of your pattern pieces themselves, or keep them pinned to the pattern pieces are my recommendations for that one, because it would be very easy to get turned around, and that's something you certainly wouldn't like to find out at the end after you had sewn everything together. And as usual, I am sewing this with 1/2 inch seam allowances, over here with Gutermann all-purpose thread on the Singer 99K. And you can see I am clipping my curves as I go here and pressing my seams open. And I will sew my last back pieces on as well. And I've done all that same stuff for the lining in the black cotton here, in addition to sewing 2 pieces of plastic boning down the center front of this lining as well, as opposed to sewing it through the outside of the garment just because I wanted to keep that very smooth. I also went ahead and top stitched 1/8 of an inch out from each of the seams on the silver side of this. I then cut plastic boning to fit each seam and then just hand stitch that down to the seam allowances along the inside. You've seen me use this technique before when boning Victorian bodices. Again, this is boning to help the garment retain its shape, not to structure the body underneath. How many times am I going to say that in this video? It's hard to understand because sometimes I think people think boning is only ever to shape the body, but often boning is just meant to hold the garment's shape as opposed to change anything about the body underneath. Now I could easily layer these wrong sides together and bind all the edges, or bias face them, I suppose. That's kind of how normal corsetry is done. But again, I was on a time crunch for this, so I just decided to go ahead and bag line this. So I'm going to go ahead and pin all along the top and all along the bottom, leave the center backs open, and go ahead and just line this right sides together, clip all these curves, clip all my corners, and turn it right side out again, which was fun with all this plastic boning in here. And yes, that plastic boning is basically just whip stitched or like felled down to the seam allowances of each seam on the inside here, as you can see. Again, this still has my 1/2 inch seam allowance. As usual, I will reinforce my corners a tiny bit, just so that when I clip those corners and turn everything right side out, nothing frays apart on me, especially with this rather fragile silver fabric. It's sensitive, but it sure is very metallic and very pretty. I actually have a few yards of this silver fabric left, and I haven't fully decided exactly what to make out of it. Although I could make a skirt to match this. Maybe, I can't decide. But yes, clipping my curves, clipping my corners, and I'll turn this right side out and give it a nice, good press. And you'll notice as I go through finishing this garment up that it's not very pretty when it's not on the body. And again, that's because this doesn't have a ton of structure inherent with it. It's just meant to fit smoothly over a structured person, aka someone wearing a corset. Until that tension from being laced around something is introduced, it's kind of a rumply looking garment all on its own. If you'd like to see me make more things like this in the future, either faux corsetry like this, where it's more of a fashiony belt thing, or actual full corsetry, fully boned corsetry, do let me know, because it's definitely something I don't mind doing. I have always liked experimenting with corsets and stays, although I can't find a stays pattern that I like right now, so I really need to experiment with that in the future. Not right now. Sadly, there's not time for experimentation with stay patterns, but hopefully one day. And I just turned the center backs in on themselves that 1/2 inch to finish this off, because I will top stitch things into place and actually slip in one more piece of plastic boning along the center backs so that this area will retain some structure when I go ahead and add in the metal eyelets in just a moment, or metal grommets, I suppose. And I'll just create a boning channel back here as I top stitch the rest of this, slipping these pieces of boning in here before I fully close it all up. Again, doing things in the fastest possible way as opposed to necessarily the very, very best, because I needed to wear this on the same evening I was making it, because I had makeup on this day, and we all know, being allergic to makeup, I try and get as much done in one day as possible whenever I have makeup on, so that's why I have to do separate filming days instead of doing consecutive filming days when doing a big lookbook like Sanctus, because I have to put about 4 days at least in between days where I wear makeup, although I have figured out that taking an antihistamine does help a little bit, at least with the stuffiness, because I also get all stuffed up, because again, I'm allergic to something in makeup. I promise I'll go get an allergy test sometime. Again, when I make the time. But here are my metal eyelets in the back of this. These are hand set or hand punched eyelets using a Tandy leather setter. Still not my favorite. These are a little bit larger, and I don't like the look of the larger grommet. And I still wasn't pleased with how these didn't go in, seamlessly either. So I still haven't found a perfect process for grommets. I almost prefer hand sewn eyelets, though again, they do take more time. So I just recommend hand-sewn eyelets even on corsetry, and certainly they would be more accurate for a Swiss waist like this. But this is what this garment looks like all finished up. Of course, I just laced this up with some matching gray ribbon to wear this over the sequin knit gown for Sanctus, and of course underneath the chainmail filigree piece here. And again, underneath the gown itself, I am wearing my Victorian corset that is made from the same exact base pattern. looking forward to making another one of these, and although I can wear this silver one without the corset underneath, it still fits in a way. It just doesn't look exactly the same because I don't have that understructure going on. But because this is made from my corset pattern, it still gives me a little bit of waist shaping all on its own, just not the same amount as the fully boned steel corset does. But I would like to tweak this pattern perhaps just a little bit and make a black version that I can wear without my corset underneath. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this project came together today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!